think that we could get to a place where Def Jam jackets and hats and, logo is a means to a new generation what TDE hats and shirts mean, or what Dreamville hats and shirts mean.
I think hip hop will always be a voice for the people.
Hey everybody, I'm Reggie Williams, founder and CEO of Ambrosia for Heads, and with me I have Jake Payne, all the way from Galveston, Texas. And together we are What's the Headline, the podcast. So I know we just talked about it a little bit, but you want to talk a little bit about how crazy your week has been?
Yeah, I mean, blessings. I certainly, there's people out here that had it far worse than I did, and there's people in Texas that have, passed away from what happened. But yeah, I mean, with the storms, my girlfriend and I came down here to get away from the Northeast for a minute. We're both working remotely right now, and thought, none of this Northeast weather would come with us, and certainly thought that if it did, wherever we would be could handle it. So yeah, it was a week. Still don't have clean water. Had 3+ days with no running water at all. No toilets working. No showers. None of that. So yeah, I don't know if anybody watches Naked and Afraid on Discovery Channel, but I feel ready. I feel like a survivalist. I'm kidding. But luckily, we had heat through a lot of it. We lost power a few times, but yeah, just been crazy. I wish I wish I would have known about those Ritz-Carlton $309 a night hotels that Ted Cruz and his wife got.
Yeah, man. I was here in New York for Hurricane Sandy, and we lost power for 11 days. And one of the things that struck me is how quickly we went to a complete state of nature. I mean, people were out fighting at the gas stations within 2 days, fighting at bodegas, fighting at the ATM machines. Did you have any of that kind of craziness going on down there?
Yeah, it's funny. I
Texas guns too. Like, I mean, it's
Yeah, I mean, it's wild. Everybody here's got crazy trucks with crazy tires, and I don't know where they get the mud that goes on these trucks, but it's impressive. Otherwise, I mean, I think this area has been really dope. I'm not trying to diss it. But I went out to get gas because all the stations were running out, and I wanted a full tank in case we needed to make moves. And of course, prices skyrocketed. When I waited an hour to get to a station to get to the pump, and they only were selling premium at a premium on top of that. And it was wild because all of these folks in trucks and SUVs were bringing containers to fill, and one of the managers of the gas station was out there yelling at people that they could not do that, and they're yelling right back, and people are getting pushy and loud with each other. Yeah, and then it was something else. And on the way home, I'm laughing because I'm like, yo, they told us that we were gonna lose power some more. So I was like, when in doubt, there's always whiskey. So I went to the store to buy a bottle of whiskey, and the power was out. The registers were down. It was literally just a woman taking cash, and sort of like the gas, they drove up all the prices. And I felt bad. I mean, I carried cash, but there were folks that very clearly needed that alcohol that were waiting out front and trying to bargain with her, like you see in a movie, like, you like this watch? Because she couldn't take credit card. And I was just like, let me get up and out.
Yeah.
So it's been wild, but the state is restoring. I'm told that AOC was down here last night helping, giving out water. I found out we were kind of in the same area of Houston last night. So shout out to everyone that's giving back and helping out. I spoke to a few people I knew that had family down here, and just saw if there was anything I could do for them, especially older folks or folks that didn't have access to a car.
It's crazy, man. I got people in Houston, people in Austin. It was wild just watching it unfold. So glad you're okay. Glad things are starting to normalize a little bit. But yeah, sounds crazy.
Yeah, man, don't mess with Texas unless you're an electric company. So.
Yeah, wow. So a lot going on in hip hop this week. I want to kick it off with something. It's crazy. You and I just did 2 episodes ago. We did an ode to 1984 as being, arguably one of the greatest hip hop years of all time. And a big part of that year was the Fat Boys. They, one of the most cohesive albums, first cohesive rap albums, really tapped into like an original music sound instead of like sampling or replaying other songs. Human beatbox, the whole nine. And we lost Buffy, the human beatbox, many years ago. You know, he died. I believe it was a heart attack. I'm not sure. But you know, this week we lost Mark Morales in the same way. You know, his manager just confirmed with TMZ today that he had gone to the hospital earlier in the week because he'd had swollen feet and swollen hands, and thought something might be seriously wrong. And they told him he needed a stent, and he was preparing to get the stent, but apparently didn't get it soon enough and succumbed to a heart attack. So major loss. You know, Mark Morales, known as Prince Marky D for Fat Boys, but also became a really phenomenal producer and writer, you know, later on in life. A lot of people don't know, but he was a producer and writer for Real Love by Mary J. Blige. A lot of the Uptown Sound music in the early days, of like Father MC, Christopher Williams, Mary, worked with Jade, worked with Cypress Hill, worked with a lot of legends, Craig Mack, you know, just a really talented dude. And I think only 54 years old. But you had known him before, right? Had you spoken with him in the past?
Yeah, I had you know, I had spoken to Mark about 10 years ago. His manager and the manager in the later years of the Fat Boys, Uncle Louie, who's down with Eric B and a host of pioneers, connected us. I was at the time the editor-in-chief of Hip Hop DX, and one of my prerogatives was that we cover the OGs and we cover them on equal billing to whatever is contemporary. And you know, Mark and Louis and Cool Rock Ski, you know, the two surviving members and their manager really worked to kind of leverage that brand, and they made partnerships with Urban Outfitters, where for a time, if you went into one of their stores, you were buying officially licensed apparel from the Fat Boys. They did a coffee partnership as well, and Mark was very generous with me, as was Louis, of sending me merch, sending me coffee. I remember drinking Fat Boys coffee for months, and it was good coffee too. And you know, Mark, we had a few phone calls together, and he was just a very generous person, very humble person. You know, even down to, I said to you this week, I never realized that on the Real Love writing credit. The name Mark Morales you see in a lot of liner notes from the 90s, but to put that together, you know, it's sort of like Andre Harrell coming out of rap, or Daddy O, you know, coming out of Stetsasonic. It's incredible to see, you know, really talented artists make that executive, you know, segue in the 90s. And you know, he was actually also involved in the early days of 50 Cent. You know, was one of the guys that I think Jam Master Jay kind of brought into the Columbia Sony situation. And 50 Cent spoken on that too, where I know he didn't necessarily find the success, but you know, that just lets you know that Mark had an incredible ear for talent.
Yeah, and still really active. You know, I saw a lot of comments on our post, you know, about people listening to him every day on Shade 45, you know, and just enjoying his show. So, you know, big loss. Been a tough year already in terms of that, but you know, definitely want to send condolences to his family, friends, and you know, the millions of fans out there, of which I think you and I were both, you know, part of that. So.
For sure. And it's crazy. I mean, 1984, you know, we just lost Ecstasy from Houdini. You know, Curtis Blow had a very real scare regarding his heart. And that was, you know, an important year in his career. It's just a reminder. I saw Cormega put up a really dope thing on his socials about, you know, he was praising Uncle Ralph McDaniels, who, you know, you and I are you know, very, we pay homage to a lot with what we do. And you know, Ralph documented these guys. Obviously, you know, you have Crush Groove and Disorderlies and a lot of stuff, but it's really important, I think, that we turn into a culture of complimenting and acknowledging and paying respect to our OGs, and it doesn't always have to be an age thing. I mean, just celebrate each other. And yeah, I'm really, it's really sad to lose Mark. And it's also something I didn't realize that needs to be said, is he was a true pioneer for Latinos. I think so often we talk about the benchmark moments for Pun and Cypress Hill and you know, other things, but you know, for Latinos, I mean, he, all of those things that the Fat Boys did, gold record, on the charts, in the movies, he was also doing that with, you know, that part of his identity in mind as well, which is really important.
Yeah, absolutely. I used to do, before you joined AFH, I used to do a column called Living Legends, where I would, celebrate, people, give them their flowers now, because I was really dismayed by, seeing people celebrate people after they died. We have so many great legends, um, who really need that. And, another platform that does that is Drink Champs.
Hmm.
And DMX was on for the second time this past week. He had been on, and they credit him for being the guy who kind of put them on the map, because he's a very elusive figure, as you know, very difficult to get an interview, and it kind of made them official in their minds, as or Nori and EFN's words, when X joined their platform. So they had him on again, and he talked about a lot of stuff. We ran a story about a week or so ago about his album features. He has been allegedly making a new album for 4 or 5 years now.
I think even longer than that. Yeah.
Yeah, and Swiss Beats, I think it was 2015, 2016, 2016 to 2017, went on a real campaign talking about him being clean and sober, and ready to work. He was working with Swizz, working with Kanye. He did multiple interviews where he's talking about the heat that they had put together, and how excited he was to share it with the world. In that beat battle that he had with Just Blaze on Hot 97, which I still think is the precursor to Versus. He played that song with Jay-Z, Jadakiss, Nas, and DMX, and just dropped it like he just dropped it like it was a regular song, and like people, I'll never forget Busta Rhymes' face, looking confused and like what the hell is this? The song still hasn't come out, but I gotta assume it's part of that project. Oh, Nas was on that song too.
Yeah, you said Nas. Yeah.
Oh, okay, yeah. So we know that there's heat, but still no album. But the whole time X had not talked about the album, but he did on this Drink Champs clips. And you want to talk about the features he mentioned?
Yeah, I mean the big one that was the headline in the Facebook share that AFH was behind is Griselda, which might not jump out at people, but very much I think they're a derivative of X's imagery, his tone, just that menacing but authentic energy. And I'm excited for that, and I believe it. I think there have been a lot of talks of what a DMX album would look like that involved Dre, that involved Kanye, that involved all of these things. I'm starting to believe it this time. And the one thing also that excited me, and I haven't seen the full episode of Drink Champs, so correct me if this is no longer true, but X is back on Def Jam. And that to me feels really good in a lot of ways. And they have the machinery and the legacy content to really make it an event. And that's what X needs, because he put out a couple of projects that were like mixtapes 10 years ago. And even this week, I texted you something about it. I was like, there were moments of flashes of really good stuff on there, but it wasn't the DMX album. So I'm thinking that could be one of the more exciting things of 2021. But what other guests do you know of?
Well, so Pop Smoke was one.
Yeah.
And he said he did not meet Pop Smoke, but he thought that Pop Smoke's energy was very akin to his, and especially like gravitating toward dogs and stuff like that, and the growl, was very much, he thought, kind of inspired by himself, or at least he heard himself in Pop Smoke. So that's another one. He also talked about Prince. He said that he met Prince in a club one time, and he talked about how when he was younger, people would kind of laugh at Prince for the high heels and the blouses and like the assless pants and stuff like that. But when he met Prince in the club, he said he was a real dude, and Prince, kind of like beckoned him, told him to come over, and he went over, and Prince talked to him for an hour, and apparently he was talking to him about the importance of owning his own masters, which is a pretty OG thing to do. But what do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, we've heard that before. I think, there's that story of Nas and Prince. Prince was the Yoda that, everyone grew up, looking to. And he really encouraged, especially Black artists, to take that ownership stake. And it's wild, I saw DMX perform recently with you, and when I say recently, in the last 5 years in Philly for one of the Roots picnics. But I saw him more recently at Soundset in Prince's backyard of Minneapolis, St. Paul, and it's awesome to hear that X made the steps to put his career in order, including what you just said. But and as a great MC, even without an album, he still had an incredible live show, and all of the health battles and X's energy, and he's up there. I don't think X is 50, but he's in his upper 40s to still put in work on level of Red and Meth and those guys, of standing on speakers and just commanding the audience. That's huge, and it makes you see the impact of somebody. I always say that DMX, and it was true even of the recent share, he is one of, I mean, tell me if you disagree, but I'm going to say top 15 artists in the AFH ecosystem. If DMX does something, people care.
Yeah, for sure.
At the highest level. And this is an artist, unlike the others in that ecosystem, give or take a Dre or an Andre 3000, he's not so prolific. I mean, he's done a few features here and there. Yeah, and to your point, I really do hope that posse cut, makes the album.
It's gotta drop. So you said you were really happy and you thought it was meaningful that he was back on Def Jam. What is it? What is it that is significant to you about him being on Def Jam? Or why is it a great thing for him to be back on Def Jam?
He had a run of #1 albums that he had at Def Jam, and he brought it with him to Columbia for the final album. I think he had a 5 or 6 album run of just straight #1s. But X, Russell Simmons told me, and he's told other people before, that the Beastie Boys were one of the artists that kept Def Jam's lights on. They only put out 1 album on Def Jam, License to Ill, but in the really rough years in the early 90s, the album selling and licensing did really well. And then you hear stories about like how in the early 90s, signing Redman, Method Man gave Def Jam a new shot in the arm that ultimately carried them to Ja Rule, Jay-Z, DMX. But DMX to me is the Def Jam superstar. Jay-Z always seemed to be like, had that partnership deal before that became a cliche. Like, it was Rockefeller, but he was at Def Jam. X, even though Rough Riders were a management team and had all of the different things, X to me just represented that label, the video game, the concerts, all of that. And I just believe they will treat him as more than a one and done entity to make bag. And one of the things, and I'm sure we've talked about in the podcast, is in the last 2 years, Def Jam has got back in business with LL Cool J, DMX, and even Chuck D and Public Enemy. I mean, Chuck put out a single this week that I happen to like, and it was a bit esoteric, came out on Def Jam. And I love to see that, because the reason, and you and I spent some time in the 1984 podcast talking about why Def Jam really is the greatest, is those are 3 great examples. So to be back working with them, I just feel that it has a storybook meaning to me. And for so many years, we've been told that DMX is making this comeback. He's got to have the machine around him. And rather than go to Atlantic or Warner or some other label, it makes sense to do that with Def Jam, like one more for the road, and maybe more, if it takes. But I would like to see him by the end of the year put out something substantial, because at some point, it turns into a detox, and Dr. Dre detox, and you ultimately you have to step to the line and shoot the ball. And we saw that with Jay Electronica last year. So
yeah, exactly. It's, people forget that DMX did something that was unprecedented in 1999, I believe it was. Like, he dropped 2 albums in a year.
98, yeah.
Which first of all, just didn't happen. And it's pretty commonplace now. You think about Griselda, people like that dropping 4, 5, 6 projects in a year. Back then, it was very much, album cycles were one a year at most, 1 every 2 years. But he dropped 2 in 1 year. Both went to #1. Both were like, platinum, like almost instantaneously. Like, he truly kept the lights on there in a major way, but they were like megawatt lights. But I would argue that, after the purchase of Def Jam and, the merger and the forming of UMG Music Group, and Island Def Jam, that the Def Jam that you speak of ceased to exist. You know, it became more of an imprint, and like more name only, but the culture and the people who were responsible for making Def Jam what it was had moved and transitioned to something else. So I hear you on what seems like a strategy and them being intentional and reassembling a lot of the people who built the house.
Mhm.
But I'm wondering if you think that the culture is still there too.
Yeah, I mean, I disagree a little bit. I think that, the Leor Cohen, Chris Lighty, Kevin Lyle's years, that carried over. And obviously, several of those guys were pupils of Russell. I think after that, you had Jay-Z come in, and that was a fun time, but it never really lived up. I mean, Jay was the biggest star in his own label. He did some cool things like sign the Roots and sign Ghostface Killah, and obviously you had Young Jeezy and Rick Ross come out of that, which were Shakir Stewart signings, I believe, both of them. You're right. I mean, there is a disconnect, but to me right now, I I have to believe there is some of that essence back in the building, even if you're not going to necessarily see it on the executive side.
Well, I think part of that might be, and you tell me what you think about this. Paul Rosenberg, sitting at the helm. He is obviously a student of hip hop and someone who respects that legacy, having been around for a long time. So, he, I think, if anyone, and understands it, I think it was very important for them to have a culture at Shade 45. There
Yeah.
was definitely kind of an aesthetic that they had, even though the MCs were different. They were all spitters. There was a fabric there at Shade 45, and so I think he understands better than most that labels have to have that kind of identity. And
Yeah.
so maybe he's trying to reassemble that. But what do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, I do and I did, and I think that a lot of these things that are coming to the light right now were under his watch. And my friend, NCB Noah was there and made a lot of those moves as well. Of just like, hey, let's to know your past is to set a course for your future. And we've seen this before, not for nothing. I mean, I remember they tried to do it with Death Row, and even out of the hands of Suge Knight, they tried to bring in other people that were in the studio and around to run the label, and it didn't work. But Def Jam's different, and to have the participation from 3 former flagship artists just says a lot to me. And DMX, you're absolutely right, just has the ability to do that. And X, I like what you just said, because I believe X was there at the very end of the Russell years and became the superstar under the Leor and Lyle's years. And to come back now and maybe steer the ship, and not for nothing. I mean, Def Jam, I think, makes its money with Kanye West, with Pusha T, with other artists that are not part of this, 80s, 90s legacy. So to have both of those things operating at the same time, I think it could be really powerful. And I think that we could get to a place where Def Jam jackets and hats and logoism means to a new generation what TDE hats and shirts mean, or what Dreamville hats and shirts mean. I would just like to see that, and I'm sure it's the nostalgist in me, but all 3 of those artists, PELLX, I believe all 3 of them have greatness in them, on the artistic tip. And I want to see that, and I want to see that done right. There's nothing worse than, great artists putting out something into the abyss. And I think that's one of the things that's been fun about AFH is we've tried to be a spotlight on that. But, we're one small, entity like that. It's much better when you have a real machine around you to make sure you cut through culture.
Yeah, I think that you mentioned labels like TDE and Dreamville. I think what makes them distinct is that they have a very clear cultural identity.
Mhm.
All the artists, like I said, kind of fit one kind of filter, even if they're different. Like JID is obviously very different than an Ari Lennox or someone like that, but they still have the same kind of vibe, if you know what I mean. Same thing with like SZA and Isaiah Rashad and Black Hippie and all those guys. And I guess proof in that is that you can easily hear all of them featuring on each other's projects. So even though they have distinct, sounds and difference, there's definitely a unifying kind of like essence to all of them. I think it becomes more difficult when you start to expand the rosters from 5 or 10 artists.
Yeah.
to hundreds of artists. It's just impossible to have that kind of cohesive unity. And I think that's what makes it difficult for big labels like what Def Jam is now to maintain that kind of cultural identity.
That's really true. And along the way, I think TDE would love to grow to to have that ability where they can sign, artists that are so far out from Kendrick. Now, maybe they're doing it the better way of slow and steady, but I even think of what Def Jam did with, bringing in Warren G to produce one of those albums that Slick Rick released from Behind Bars. I think it was called Behind Bars. And on paper, that might seem like two polar opposites on the map and in theory, but it worked. And there was that sense of family. And, Isaiah Rashad is totally different than Schoolboy Q, but there's great songs, I believe, that they're on together and they've been on tour together and things like that. So I hear your point. It'll be interesting to see. And I come back to what I said is you just got to shoot the ball. And I don't know what we'll see with LL. I mean, like I said, Chuck D put a record out this weekend, but I really want X to make music and release it and test the waters and hopefully feel his own greatness.
Yeah, one of the things that really set him back, he was on the path. He was releasing music with Dan Grease.
Mm-hmm.
He did have a couple of releases during that time that Swizz was out kind of promoting what was coming. But then he had a setback, checked himself into rehab, and ended up going to prison for a year.
Mm-hmm.
So, one of the things about Drink Champs is that he was drinking on the show. Does that give you pause, given like how much he's struggled with substances over the years?
I just think everyone's on their own journey. And I also just finished rewatching True Detective season 1, where Matthew McConaughey will drink a lot and then go sober and drink a lot and then go sober. That's touchy. And there have been guests on Drink Champs that don't drink, and, X didn't have to do that, but it's not for me to say. I don't want to speak on that because there's people I know and care about that battle with that. Whatever keeps X clean, making good decisions, and most importantly, just out of jail. That's what I want to see.
Yeah,
I'm not trying to dodge the question either.
No, I hear you. I think we all rooting for him. I think what you said is right. Like everyone makes their own choices, and we'll see. But it seems like he's being active again, and I hope that it comes to fruition.
Yeah, and those setbacks are exactly why we root for him. I think I look at why did X never play himself? Even when he put out subpar mixtapes and things like that. I mean, there was a time when he came out dissing Drake and he's kind of, apologized for that. But X, people never dismiss him. And I feel like it's been just watching that authenticity of this guy's going to do what he's going to do, whether it's behind the wheel of a car or in the microphone booth or whatever else. With the week I had, I did not watch that whole episode, but it's definitely on my radar, and it's dope to hear what you said. Just to summarize that X helped make Drink Champs, because I know early on those guys were counting on, Drake and Kendrick and some other artists participating that might not have happened. And I'm sure they will happen, but X helped his man Nori get to the next level with that, which is dope.
Yeah, word. So you mentioned LL a few times. LL was in the news also this week as a nominee for the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. He, Rage Against the Machine, Jay-Z, which I think is really interesting, because Jay is one of those guys who's still very much current with making music and making, I think, some of his best music. 444, I think, is his top 3, personally. It's interesting to me because every single time we post about Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, it's always such a polarizing thing. People are always like, hip hop isn't rock and roll. Who cares? Why y'all posting about this? Or it's like, oh, this is dope. This is great. I hope they get it right this time. I kind of see the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame as really the Music Hall of Fame at this point. So I'm always happy to see hip hop get recognition, no matter what the platform may be. But I think it would be amazing for LL and Jay to get in. It's not clear to me, how they make their decisions, because there's a lot of people who I think Janet's up again too, right? Isn't she's been up like a million times, but hasn't
Don't get me to lying on that one. Okay. I know Mary J. Blige is.
Mary J. Blige is. There are people though who, like, you know, it's like the Grammys where they'll be up many times and don't get in. So I hope both those dudes do. But what's your take on that in general in terms of like rap being in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame and, like, you know, the pushback that we get?
So I've been in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame 3 times. I mean, I grew up in Pittsburgh, which is 2 hours from Cleveland, and you know, there were some summers I remember my mom taking me. That was our like summer vacation, was to go to Cleveland, get something to eat, and go to the Hall of Fame because she knew I liked music. And when you go there and see the museum itself, it's staggering. And after seeing that 3 different times, 3 different kind of special exhibits, I want hip hop in there. Now, with that said, I mean, hip hop is getting its own, you know, shout out to the Universal Hip Hop Museum. They've broken ground in the Bronx. I'm sure COVID and all else that's going on has set it back, but we will have our own, you know, museum. And also shout out to the library at, you know, Cornell, where you can visit and access a lot of things. At least you could the last time I heard a year or 2 ago. So we have our own things and we're going to get more of them, but absolutely in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, I want to see that. And I'm not somebody that makes it a yearly habit to watch the, you know, the ceremony or the concert that they do with it and usually run on HBO. I've caught it. I've not. It's cool. But I agree with what you said. I do want to see Jay. I do want to see LL in there. I would love it if they got in there together, because if for anybody that has watched some of LL's recent press, those guys have an interesting dynamic, the 2 of them. And I know that that was one of the things that people have kicked around of like, yo, that would be an amazing versus. So just to watch those 2 guys tear down a stage together would be huge. And I'm going to take it one step further. For all that debate, you know, I remember we were covering a lot of, you know, who was it? Was it Gene Simmons that was pushing back on Pac, even though there's a great photo of the 2 of them. You know, with LL and Jay, both of those guys brought true rock and roll music into their own. I mean, you look at the Radio album, come on now. And then also, you know, not only Jay's project with Linkin Park, but 99 Problems was an incredible revival of that same sound that LL made with Radio.
Right, that's true. Both Rick Rubin, you know. You know, so, you know, I've been to the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame too, and it is an amazing place. I will say that one of the good things that came from COVID was this year's version of the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, the way they did it. It was like mini documentaries, and it was absolutely amazing. It reminded me almost of like the Defiant ones in terms of like how intimate it felt and like how rich the storytelling was. And so part of me kind of hopes that they maintain that format, because I think it's better than, it was better to me than what they typically do with the performances. But yeah, it would be cool to see you know, the 2 of them on that stage together. You know, it is weird to think of like someone who's still so current, like a Jay, being memorialized. And I know that like VH1's Hip Hop Honors was kind of similar to that too. But I think that they both should get in, and would love to see it. You know, Rage Against the Machine also like just would be that would just be an epic show.
Yeah, big facts. And those guys, I think they would do it together. And you know, I like what you said too. And it was funny, in November, I saw you and I started talking about that special, those vignettes that you mentioned, because I was like blown away by the Biggie one. We should talk, you know, more to say about that in a second, in Depeche Mode. And you were like, yo, don't talk about it anymore, because I got it queued up for tonight. And those were really well done. I like that a lot more than what they've done in years past. And I thought they did that with a lot of class and a lot of taste. So Biggie, that's not the last vignette we're gonna get of him, apparently.
Why don't you tee that up?
Yeah, so I love, one of the things I love is how the internet lets you know what's coming onto the, you know, Hulu, Netflix, all of that next month. So next month we are getting a Biggie documentary that is sanctioned by his estate and his family. And you know, it's kind of the his last word, the fair thing to say. I think that, you know, what it is we've seen so much in the last 5 years about Biggie's death that it's important to take something longer form and make it about his life. And that's what I understand this is.
Yeah, I think that there was so much excitement. I was very excited for the Biggie feature film.
Hmm.
And I think that many people walked away kind of disappointed by that. I don't think it had the same kind of depth that people had been hoping for. And it's interesting because I think that had it been done now, we've seen this evolution, and we'll get to Wu in a second now, but where stories are being told as series instead of just a single
Hmm.
movies. That's the criticism you hear about all this films. Man, they had so much they didn't cover, blah blah blah. And I think that that's part of what happened with the Biggie film. Although there were some phenomenal castings, like Naturi Naughton from Power, who was Lil Kim, was just unbelievable.
Kim's still tight about that too.
Is that right?
Yeah.
She was great though. Man. I thought she was amazing. But in any case, this documentary, like you said, is blessed by the estate, in particular his mom, who's featured in it. She has said in interviews that this documentary is really going to focus on his life instead of the circumstances around his death, which is something that she thinks distinguishes it from the multiple documentaries that have already been made about Biggie's life. And she said that this is how he would have wanted to have been remembered. That to me is gigantic. And seeing the trailers, I was struck. I saw the trailer maybe 2, 3 weeks ago, and I was struck by, whoa, I've never seen this footage of Big before. And you and I, we've probably seen every photo ever of Biggie. We've probably seen every clip ever of Biggie. We've done like deep dives into interviews and posted stuff and everything. So to get footage and that has never been seen before, or at least extremely rare, is amazing. It feels a bit like The Last Dance for me. Like it just is like stuff that you didn't even know existed because you would have figured it would have been out there. So I'm very excited to see it. I do hope that it's kind of the last thing, because I think at a certain point it starts to become exploitative. But
Yeah.
I doubt it will be the last thing. But I hope that and it sounds like it will be really representative of him in the way it should be.
Yeah, and I've seen, there's folks that I often feel that get pinched out of the story. Easy Mo B is one of them, and I saw him endorsing it online. I look forward to it, and I've spoken to Big's mom a few times for interviews, and she's a phenomenal woman, and carries that pain with her, but also that, every time and there's only been a handful, but every time I've finished a conversation with her, she wants to drive home the point of his life, not his death. And so to do that in the most important medium of our times right now is great. And I hope that it leads people to bring out the music. Sometimes I feel like Biggie's catalog, which is, smaller than some of the other artists we've lost, can still get lost in the shuffle unless it's a 20-year anniversary or a 15-year. And I just want to see people, blasting that shit. So,
Yeah, no, it's amazing. It's a testament to him that his music can still be so relevant and so influential in the culture. Like it's been almost 30 years. I
yeah,
mean,
yeah,
Ready to Die dropped in 1994. We're just 3 years away from that. It's really
that's
crazy.
nuts.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Isn't it? So speaking of series that tell stories about artists' lives, so Wu-Tang Clan had a series on Hulu. Um, a 10-part episode series last year, and it didn't even get to 36 Chambers. It was really about the very kind of origin story of like RZA and Ghostface and Raekwon. Anybody else was covered? I think it was
Meth, because Dave Easton.
Meth. Yeah, yeah. But that's coming back, and RZA had some words about what to expect. You want to break that down?
Yeah, I mean, RZA said that the season 2 is going to focus on the making of Enter the 36 Chambers, which I'm in for. I want to see that, and to your point, there's a lot that doesn't get covered sometimes when you take an album or you take a movement, and that album is legendary because that album is what ultimately forms the clan. And you and I have spent time. We did an interview, kind of an interesting piece with Master Killer one time, and and the whole reason that Master Killer's in Wu-Tang Clan allegedly is that Killer Priest fell asleep, and Master Killer wrote a verse and got on the mystery of chess boxing. So things as arbitrary as that shaped history, because now, Master Killer is a universally known name. So I'm eager to watch this. And I can't say I watched all 10 episodes of the first season, but I watched some of it. I thought the acting was really well done, and now with this, I'll probably just start at the beginning and knock out 2 seasons. So I'm looking forward to that, and I like that they're staying in the music and not jumping ahead to talk about, the late 90s branding and all of that stuff. Take it one step at a time and act like you're going to get many, many seasons out of this, which I hope that they do.
Yeah, it took me a while to kind of catch it because I started watching and I didn't understand the pace that it was going to go at, and so I was like, "Yo, what's going on? Why is this moving so slowly?" But then when I stopped, when I let go of my expectations and just watched it for what it was really cool and really interesting to see the history that was there. I didn't realize that there was beef between like Ghost and Raekwon, or I didn't remember. I'm sure you reported it like at some point, but just to see how deep that was and to see how they overcame that is fascinating, and really to understand the things that this group went through as individuals to get to where they are. So I'm really looking forward to this. Given how deep of a dive season one has been, I think they're going to show us, they're going to give us insight into the creative process on an unprecedented level. So I think it should be really dope.
Yeah, and RZA's just, I mean, he was one of, I spoke to him about a year ago, and RZA is in a really cool place as we talk about legacy. I think RZA is very interested in telling the Wu story. And we got that in the Showtime documentary too, which went to places that weren't so comfortable. I mean, and he's into telling his story authentically. And I just like that. I'm excited because that honesty and authenticity lives in different ways. This is the dramatic version. We're going to get books, we're going to get interviews, maybe more documentaries. I'm just here for it all.
Yeah, word. So another great thing that happened this week is Lauryn Hill, Miseducation of Lauryn Hill went diamond. And what that is it's 10 times platinum, 10 million copies sold, or the equivalent thereof at this point.
And certified. Certified is a key part too, because there's artists that do it, but you can't certify it, which is, I encourage everyone to go on the RIA website and look, because there's a lot of like, the Fugees have kicked around this album of, 22 million, but it doesn't show in the numbers. So to do it certified means that has sold way more than 10 million, internationally. Sorry to cut you off.
Yeah, no, and she's the first woman MC to do this, and only a few hip hop albums like that. I think Eminem has done it.
Beastie Boys, Nelly.
Yeah. So it's a major, major accomplishment for her. I'm still tight over the Finding the Goat competition.
Yeah.
Her losing in the first round. She lost to AZ, and AZ is dope, like one of my favorites, like no shade whatsoever. Excuse me, but Lauryn has done, I mean, her, just historically what she's done, again, like now it's unprecedented, so to see her fall in that first round that way, I thought was so unjust. But I'm glad that in the bigger universe, she's getting the kind of recognition that she deserves.
Yeah, I mean, it's just such an important album too. And I know that there's people that often debate, the division of hip hop versus, R&B and singing on that album. But it's great to see. No matter what, Lauryn Hill is one of ours, just as hip hop heads. And that album came out at a really dark time, in the post, death row bad boy stuff. And it just was a beacon of light, and not for nothing. I mean, it is a controversial album in how she kind of addresses the breakup of the Fugees, but that's not why we remember it. We remember it because of the great music. And even though Lost Ones is kind of a diss record, it's or Lost One, it's just hard as hell rapping and beautiful production. And I'm really happy to see that too. That album means a lot to our readers. When it went to the Library of Congress a few years ago, that was a big story for us. And diamond certification is dope, because you're right, there's only a handful of artists, and truly the high level. Biggie's in there, Pac's in there, I believe an Outkast album is in there. I might be mistaken on that part, but that's a hell of an achievement that so many artists can't touch.
Yeah, and you talk about the controversy about like rap versus the singing part, but I don't think it's any different than Outkast's album, Speaker Box Love Below, which won.
Yeah.
Dre's side was almost all singing, and he had, I think, one or two rap songs on it. And also, if you think about the evolution of albums now, like there are lots of artists out there that have like half and half. Drake being, the obvious one. So, all that said, let me ask you this: do you think that Lauryn Hill is the greatest woman rapper of all time?
She's definitely in the top 3, maybe 2. I got to take a long look at Missy Elliott, you know, with that. And I wouldn't be upset. I wouldn't leave the table if you said that, but that's not a statement. I've never said ... is the greatest, female MC. I don't know. Have you? Is that a statement you believe?
I think she's the GOAT, personally. People talk about the size of her catalog, but we just talked about Biggie extensively. And Biggie has 2 albums. If you think about Lauren, yes, she has 1 solo album or a couple. If you count the MTV one, but she also has those 2 Fuji albums.
Yeah.
The first one was okay. The Vocab remix really kind of like reignited their career.
Yeah.
But the second album, The Score, obviously she's a huge part of that. And that album is another gigantic one. So she's been involved in 2 of the biggest selling rap albums of all time.
Yeah.
I don't think that's a coincidence. And she's just mega, mega talented. She could spit with the best from Lost Ones is just insane. And, her freestyles are crazy.
You have a favorite Lauryn verse?
I mean, probably Lost Ones, but some of the freestyles that we posted over the years too, with MTV and everything too. But so her catalog, I think, is big enough to justify that. And I also love the subject matter too. She can go there and just talk, the hip hop, greasy talk, but she can also get super deep about things,
motherhood and femininity and all that. Yeah.
So the range is there. So I'll give it to her. I think I think the only person really challenging her, and people are gonna be mad at me for this, is Nicki Minaj. I think she's the only one who, because Nicki has had an incredible career, incredible success. She's had a lot of variety. She's had longevity at this point, because 10 years in the game is a long time, or even 7 years. So I think that I think she's next. And that's not to say, I guess, it's commercial, but it's artistry as well, and a bunch of things. So I would give it to Nicki next.
Yeah, I would disagree with that. I mean, I can see where you're coming from, but I don't think that Nicki has a classic album. But I think you made a really important point there about Lauryn, is especially just having finished talking about Biggie, Lauryn's catalog is big enough. And you often hear people say that, 1 album, 2 albums. We treat Biggie that way. And I would venture to bet that song for song, their catalogs look a lot similar. And yeah, I mean, Lauryn is up there, and it's really good to see. And you also mentioned Outkast, and that is the album that is Diamond, I believe. Tupac's Greatest Hits is Diamond, Biggie's Life After Death. Those are double albums, which you get Diamond certification really halfway, doing it. That was the loophole, and that's why you saw so many double albums, around Y2K. Miseducation of Lauryn Hill is a single album. Shout out to my uncle Dan, who watches this podcast. He bought me a copy the week it came out as a gift of like, hey, you need to hear this. Even though I certainly, was up on Lauryn. He was just like, yo, let me save you the $16. Here you go. And it's a great album, and it'll be played forever. And it's a classic album, which Missy has, which Queen Latifah has. There's people out there that ride hard for Lil' Kim and say that hardcore is classic. And I don't know, but Lauryn is definitely in the GOAT conversation within that.
Yeah. Eminem's got 2 Diamond albums, which is insane. And yeah, Missy definitely. I don't know. I think maybe the first one could be a classic album, but I don't see any of the other ones from Missy being classic. But yeah, but all dope. Latifah, I think that, when all is said and done, Rhapsody's going to stand with the greats, because she's had some amazing, amazing albums. Like, in my opinion, 2 arguable classics in a row. With Wisdom and Eve. So And I think Cardi B, she's not going to rap long enough. I think Cardi B is going to ultimately just be, as she has been, a bigger personality, but she's going to be a gigantic artist, over time too. So
Yeah, and I know it's important to note. I mean, both you and I have been huge proponents of let's celebrate the accomplishments of female MCs and artists and creatives, but not play them in separate categories. And I know this is strictly a question, but it's one of the things I'm really proud of with AFH is we never dwelled on that other than to celebrate.
yeah.
And we never, as far as I know, use the word femc, which hate.
Yeah, nah, never, never. Yeah, no, no, never, never, no, never, no. Um, Two Tiny Desks came out this week. One of the things I've missed the most from COVID is Tiny Desks because just the acoustics were always so sharp and it just sounded so amazing. Shout out to Abby O'Neill, who's been a key part of that. And they started doing the Tiny Desk at home. And the first ones were just artists like really rapping over records, which was cool, but just didn't have the same music because part of what made it so great was seeing these artists playing with bands that you typically wouldn't see. But this week they had a return to that. And it was an interesting pairing because I'm going to guess that it wasn't coincidental that they had Rick Ross and 2 Chainz, capitalizing on that versus heat that they had. And they both kind of brought it. Ross had a band. I think I saw he's only played with a band like once before this, and the band sounded amazing. You and I both weren't necessarily fans of the background singers, but
in the words of Star, turn his mic off.
Ross did 5 songs, I believe, and interestingly, 4 of the 5 were from Teflon Don,
which is the joint.
Yeah. So what do you make of that? You think, were you surprised that Ross would go so hard given how extensive his catalog is with one album?
I love it. I mean, Ross is true to it. And I thought about it too. And I was like, that was a very, very musical album, an album that you and I both love. And I think I consider it his best. I don't know about you, but I think also to take those songs and lay them out with a live band, it's just what you want to hear. And I thought that was really cool. And that's what Stevie Wonder would do, or what any artist. You're not there just to promote something new. And I think Ross really over the last 2 or 3 years has positioned himself as that. I'm going to be an entertainer above a marketer, because Lord knows he's getting his money a host of different ways, including coming to America. So too.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, so then I watched the 2 Chainz one, and at first I was like, "Oh man, this is disappointing," because he was sitting in a chair. He was obviously lip syncing. He had a woman massaging his feet and giving him a pedicure. I'm like, "What's going on, man?" It's shot like a music video, and I'm like, "Oh man." But then I was listening to it more, and the second song I was like, "Huh, wait a minute, that sounds like live vocals." And I flipped back to the video, and he had a band. He was moved to a stage. And he did his thing with the band too, which was really dope. And then at the end, he explained that it was being shot from a nail salon that he owns in Atlanta, and so he was getting his flex on with that. So I thought it was really dope. And Ross shot it, even though he lives in Atlanta now. He shot his in Miami at an art gallery that was meaningful to him. But did you catch the 2 Chainz one too, or no?
I didn't. I only caught Ross, and then all hell broke loose with what happened in Texas. But I will watch the 2 Chainz one because he's a great entertainer, and I like that kind of showmanship, and that's part of his brand especially.
Yeah, and he did 97 Hove and a couple other joints from the album. Interestingly, he picked I think 3 joints that we have on our playlist. So I thought that was cool.
Oh wow. I continue to play his album, and I know we put it in our best albums of 2020, and it definitely deserved to be there.
Yeah, for sure. So that was cool. It was cool to see them. I know you wanted to talk about. So Dave Chappelle, put out a clip saying, it was a really interesting clip because, the first part he's talking about COVID and trying to navigate that, and how he got it, and there were people out there who seemed to be gleeful that he got it, and like, you know, he really kind of went on them as haters. But in the end, it turned into him, you know, talking about how he had kind of gone to war with Viacom about them putting up Chappelle's show on Netflix and him not getting, you know, paid for it, and how Reed Hastings, you know, had pulled, or Ted Sarandos from Netflix had pulled the content, and fans hadn't watched it either. And ultimately, he, you know, came out favorably and got a good deal from them and went back up. So he announced it going back up. Now, you had said in the document that that may be a pathway to De La for De La Soul. What did you mean by that?
Yeah, I mean, when De La, and let me just preface it this way: De La is my favorite working hip hop group right now. You know, Gangstar, you know, R.I.P. Guru, and Outkast is on hiatus. I love De La Soul, and I've been a little bit confused with what the end route is of their campaign boycotting Tommy Boy, because that contract, be it unfair, be it, you know, and there's a bunch of little components to that of why De La Soul's music isn't on the DSPs. But ultimately, 2 years ago, when those parties, De La and Tommy Boy, were trying to come together, it ended poorly, and that music still is not online. I thought that what Dave did shows that an artist can use their clout, use their power to change contracts, because Dave signed his deal with Viacom very early in his career. You know, has since talked about all the tax on that mentally and emotionally. And I think for De La too, and one of the things that's interesting about De La is it's more than just kind of a contract that they find less favorable. They said, look, this company that we trusted didn't do business properly on the samples. So as a result, we made several classic albums and can't get paid on them. We still haven't recouped because they didn't do their due diligence. So I looked at this and I said, wow, you know, everyone's out here clapping for Dave. Maybe this movement will lead to an impasse with De La and Tommy Boy. Because I would love to just see those albums be out there to be celebrated. I think it really stifles their legacy. And maybe that's a leap between the two, but I just saw a correlation and thought this podcast was a place to mention it.
Yeah, it's tough, man. You know, when I was an entertainment lawyer, one of the things I asked the partner was, you know, what is key in a negotiation, and he said leverage. You know, and the key here is that Chappelle had leverage. He is obviously one of the biggest stars for Netflix now. He's had a massive deal for them. I'm sure his specials are doing crazy numbers. And Netflix has massive leverage with any content providers because they're giving out big checks. And so for them to pull that with Viacom, and who knows what conversations were being held behind closed doors about other Viacom content, you know, is significant. You know, so Chappelle had leverage here that I don't know that De La has, you know, in their situation. So
That's a really good point.
yeah, so I'm not sure, but yeah, we all want that catalog up, and you know, I know, yeah, I know that both sides have tried for a long time, so I'm hoping that they do make some progress at some point.
Word.
Go ahead. So one of the last things I want to talk about was Sci-Hi the Prince. You know, one of my favorite MCs. You know, his last album was one of my favorites that year. That made our list that year.
No Dope on Sundays. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh man, amazing album. You know, many people know him from his affiliation with Kanye with Good Music. He was a key writer on My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy. Has been in that camp for a long time. I've interviewed him. Very talented dude, very humble, very funny dude. Was involved in a wild event this past week. A car chase. He was driving his Bentley SUV. A red Maserati pulled up. He thought that the people wanted to race because it kept coming up real close to him. And so he sped up, and then they sped up, and then he realized, you know, very quickly that it wasn't a race, that like they had guns and were, you know, trying to do something, kill him, steal his car, whatever it was. And so he ended up in a high-speed chase, going 120 miles per hour at certain points, reversed on the highway. You know, the people did a U-turn to come back after him on the highway, like on the wrong side of the road, like, and shot his car up multiple times. He ended up wrapping it around a tree and flipped over on its side. He ran on foot. You know, they came and back and found the car and shot at it some more. And so he thinks it was an attempt to like assassinate him or murder him. And you know, spoke about it with TMZ and with the police. I've seen the clips have been pulled down, so I don't know if they're trying to use it for evidence or whatever it might be. But really scary situation. But what was your take when you, because he tied it into the murders that are going on in Atlanta too right now with a lot of artists.
Yeah, I mean, it's scaring me right now. I mean, we just came off of Benny being shot where I am in Houston. You know, this happened to Ross like 10 years ago in Fort Lauderdale. And Sci-Hi is one of the least controversial artists that I can think of. I mean, apart from a little tiff with Joe Budden, this is not an artist that I've known to have beef with anybody. And certainly not somebody that throws a lot of menacing jabs in his lyrics. If anything, he's the opposite. He provides a lot of vegetables and a lot of food for thought in his music. So to see this just shocked me. I'm so glad he's okay, but it really, it's scary. And one of the things that I think overall we've seen in hip hop is artists are moving differently. I think the era of putting wealth on, presenting wealth to the public world has changed a lot. You know, and then there's little windows of it, you know, but I think it's more likely, I mean, just to come off of what you just said, for 2 Chainz to say, hey, I own a business, than it is for 2 Chainz to say, hey, you know, I have 100 cars in my garage. And there's a lot of folks out there that are down to take it. And it's just a reminder, I think, to all of us to move carefully. And I'm glad that this didn't go another way.
Yeah, for sure. Like it shocked me. It just didn't make sense because, like you said, he's not that kind of dude. He's never been that kind of artist. So it was very strange and unsettling.
Yeah, man, I had my car broken into this week and it was locked, and I found out that there's technology out there that makes people be able to get into keyless entries. You can go on Amazon and do it. Don't anybody do this, but again, I mean, totally different circumstances, different gravity, but just a reminder that, you know, people out here are trying to get it however they can. And yeah, just wild times.
Yeah, it's crazy. Well, speaking of assassination attempts, a new movie came out last week on HBO Max and in theaters also, Judas and the Black Messiah. You know, it's about the FBI's assassination of Fred Hampton and their use of an informant, William O'Neill, to infiltrate the Black Panthers in Chicago and you know, get close enough to him in order to do that. Really powerful film. Daniel Kaluuya from Get Out and you know, other stuff, and then Lakeith Stanfield from Atlanta and a bunch of other films play the 2 lead roles. Excellent film. I've seen it twice. Watched it with my son also. But the soundtrack was amazing and a throwback to some of the soundtracks of, you know, when soundtracks really mattered, when you know, they really put them together intentionally. Like I think of like a Minister Society, a Boys in the Hood, a Juice, you know, going back to that level. And
very thematic. Yeah, I mean, like I'm thinking of We Will When We Were Kings, you know, just those you know, focused soundtracks.
Black Panther, you know, and executive produced by Hit Boy. It's got songs by Black Thought, by Nas, by Rhapsody and JID, by G Herbo. A lot of they did a lot of the Chicago cats, which I think is really cool too. And one of the standouts, the one that got everyone's attention, was the first ever collaboration between Nipsey Hussle and Jay-Z, which is just absolutely incredible. But what was your take on the album? I put like 6-7 joints on this.
You did. I mean, everything you just said, I just co-signed. And I thought it was really cool that it was a cross section. You know, another artist on there at the end is like a bonus cut is Rakim. You know, just another Nas joint titled EPMD. Just very interesting album. Shout out to Hit Boy, who continues to, you know, really cement a presence of more than an a la carte producer in this culture. And yeah, I just thought it was really cool. That JID Rhapsody Masego joint has been in heavy rotation for me.
Crazy.
Great to see. I still need to see the film. I think we even reported the production of the film in its infancy stages on AFH, but just with the week I've had. But I've heard nothing but great things about it too.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I love that JID Rhapsody song. Hit Boy is spitting on the album too. Like he's actually rapping really, really well. So I was very pleasantly surprised by that one. But there's a lot more new music that you included too that I hadn't seen. So anything you want to highlight?
Yeah, I mean it was a really cool week. I want to give a man, where to begin? We talked about Wu earlier. Shout out to Method Man. He partnered with Street Life, who has long been his right hand man. Some could say his protege. They came out with a joint called "The Story of My Life," which, if you heard Street Life on Takal and you know who this guy is, him and Meth are doing an album together. We reported that on AFH. But this joint I've just really been playing all through the weekend. It's produced by K Def, who people know as Marley Marl's protege, worked with Lords of the Underground. So that was a big one for me. Also want to give it up to Nick Caution. So I'm one of those people that I was a huge fan of Capital Steez. And when he passed, I always, put an ear to what Joey is up to, but I haven't been the most open to Pro Era as a whole thing. Like I'll do Beast Coast or whatever. And Nick Caution put out an album called Anywhere But Here, and I've really been enjoying it. He's got a joint I sent to you with Denzel Curry called Bad Day, and Denzel is really, of the last 3 years, and I know his career goes back a decade to Raider Clan and all that stuff, but Denzel Curry, if I'm saying his name and you've only heard one or two songs, he is somebody that is rapping with the best of them right now. And that feature I enjoyed. I played it this morning. So yeah, those are two. What else did you hear this week that you dug?
Denzel is super dope. We had a song or two of it on our playlist, our Spotify playlist, heavy rotation for a year or so. He did that cover of Rage Against the Machine. Was it Killing in the Name of or Calm Like a Bomb?
Man, now you got me wondering. Was it Testify? Killing in the Name of, I believe. Yeah, it was dope.
Yeah, it was super dope, but like incredible artist. Really love him. This week, what did I listen to? Nothing particular. I actually went back, after our great interview with Pharaoh Monch last week, I went back and listened to The Equinox by, Organized Confusion. I downloaded Lifestyles of the Poor and Dangerous, Big L. I've been really, and, Ariana Grande. I'm trying to keep my ears fresh.
You didn't roll the R on Grande. Okay.
Even a little Shania Twain, man. You got to keep it keep it varied. So
word, yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I listened to the things you put in, the Street Life and Method Man song. I want to check out the Smith and Wesson, Sean Price Buckshot song, which sounds really dope too.
Yeah, Tech just is working on a new project, and General Steel put out one recently that has the Outlaws on it and some other people. This one I enjoyed. I mean, Boot Camp for Life is in the title. You get what, as I imagine. I also want to acknowledge DJ Muggs. One of the things I've been listening to a lot is Madlib's album, which we've talked about here. And Muggs, is so prolific. He's got an album. They put out the first single this week with Rome Streets, great Brooklyn rapper that, we've been talking about. We talked about him with Static Selector in our interview, but Muggs put out an instrumental joint. It's in Latin, but it translates to Black Death. And I just was playing that a ton, especially as, the world was caving in here in Texas. And Muggs deserves his props just on the instrumental tip, for sure. And I mentioned that Chuck D song earlier. The name of it is It's So Hard to See My Baseball Cards Move On. And, one of my favorite things about Chuck D is avid sports fan. He did as much for the Pittsburgh Pirates logo in my lifetime as any player, because we've had some rough years. But it's a really cool song conceptually of kind of the thing that we're talking about with hip hop. Like, how do you feel when your childhood heroes are no longer with you? So I just dug the sentiment of that. And I'll give one more shout out to Marlon Craft, who, Manhattan MC has been, putting in work for 5 or 6 years. he's working with Dante Ross, who I believe is, you know, the greatest A&R. But his he put out a new album, and in it he's got a joint, I want to say it's called Get to Work, with Oswin Benjamin, Chris Rivers, who's Pun's son, and some other cats. And that's been, I sent that to you. That's been in heavy rotation for me as well.
That's dope. And one more shout out from last week, Phife Dawg, his first official release from his upcoming new album, Nutshell Part 2. He had released Nutshell, which was just one and done verse a couple years ago. They added on Busta Rhymes and Redman to that. You know, really dope song, and looking forward to that project.
Yeah, and from what I understand too, that song was As You Hear It before Phife had passed. Redman spoke about it to Combat Jack, RIP. And yeah, I mean, it's just, I think that that song is as intended, and you put it on the playlist, and it's great to see people jamming to it.
Yeah, for sure. So what's your song of the week?
Man. I will I'll go with Muggs, man. Black Death, shout out to Cypress Hill Muggs. They've been great supporters of AFH. And yeah, I'm just gonna give it to the Black Goat producer himself.
I'm gonna go with Seen a Man Die, Scarface. Was listening to that today, and you know, storytelling is still just so on point, and that beat is incredible.
Man, the whole Diary album, just nuts.
Yeah.
Well, man, until we do it again.
Yeah, for sure, man. Glad you're back up on your feet. And yeah, talk soon.
We will. All right.
Peace.
Peace.